Forbes 30 under 30, co-founder, chief strategy officer at Popchew. So we have Rushir Parikh. Pleasure to have you on the show, man.
There's a massive opportunity to build food brand for the next generation. Popchew is sort of this like consumer facing company that builds great tasting food at scale all across the country and soon around the world.
You have some like pretty cool investors on your cap table. Jake Paul, Pomp, Long Journey Ventures, right? They led you around.
Yep.
Like when a Jake Paul comes in and invests in your company, like how does that even happen?
So Jake has a
okay. Let's switch to Pomp, because and it's funny actually.
The Pomp story is a good one.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Let's start with it. Break it down.
Okay. So
Before we get into the video, YouTube analytics say that 90% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you want to see even bigger guests, better conversations, please subscribe. It really helps us grow the podcast. And with that, onto the video. It's a pleasure having you on.
Thank
Ever
you.
since we spoke obviously at a networking event a couple of weeks ago, and you were definitely like one of the people that stood out. And I was like, what you're doing is super cool. The timing of it with like how the creator economy is like developing, and even what we're seeing with different creators, I was like, the timing of the company you're building is perfect.
Totally.
You know, actually, let me not leave the audience in the dark anymore. So we have Rushir Parikh. Pleasure to have you on the show, man. Forbes 30 under 30, co-founder, chief strategy officer at Popchew. To start off, do you just want to kind of intro what Popchew is, what you guys are working on, what you guys do?
Yeah, of course. So Popchew is a food tech company. And the basic thesis is that there's a massive opportunity to build food brand for the next generation. Really powered by iconic individuals, brands, and IP holders that can sort of drive consumer demand. And then Popchew is sort of this like consumer-facing company that builds like great tasting food at scale all across the country and soon around the world.
I like that. The next generation of food brands. It's interesting. Like even just before we arrived, Chris and I were talking about like how the influence has kind of changed. Like the people that we look at as like authority figures that we follow, that we truly like value their opinions. It's just transitioned so rapidly. Like in the last, I would say definitely the last 10 years, it's gone from being like the institutions, the big companies, like the news networks, to a lot more like individuals, influencers. I'm curious, like what made you even want to get into this space? This episode is brought to you by Free Agency. If you want to take your career to the next level, Free Agency is a company that you should check out. They manage and represent talent in the tech industry, and they provide you with a dedicated talent agent to help you find, engage, and win top of market roles that will maximize your earning potential. No more leaving money on the table. Stop job searching alone and start building your dream career today with Free Agency. Anyway, back to the show. Like, what made you see the opportunity?
Yeah, great question. So, I think I like grew up around food. So my uncle's a chef. He's like won the James Beard Award for Best Chef of the South. And I grew up chopping onions in the back of the kitchen. And really just sort of like fell in love with food and ended up, obviously like working in tech, dropped out of college, joined a startup in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And really just sort of like, again, found this like love for the intersection of the digital and physical worlds coming together, and ended up making the move to SF, worked at a grocery delivery startup. And just sort of like through that experience, learned a little bit about ghost kitchens, just because it was like a tangential thing. And as I started thinking about like what I wanted to do next, there was a lot of conversation about like career economy. And I myself had followed like a variety of people online. I didn't necessarily consider them creators, right? But then I could sort of understand this appeal of buying product from them, and started just thinking like, is there a way that you can sort of like solve this sort of thing where creators don't really have an opportunity in food today, other than maybe you can like write a cookbook, right? But if you wanted to start a restaurant, that was like $1 million that you have to put down. It's very stressful. You have to go and hire a team. It's like all this work.
Mm.
So what is like a super fast way that an influencer who, that's like their core product is like their influence essentially. Um, how can you go and build a solution for them to reach their audience at scale in food? And that's sort of like where Popchew came to be. And I ended up writing a blog post and met my co-founder Nick through that. And Nick had 4 or 5 years worth of experience working in ghost kitchens, virtual brands, working with restaurateurs, and sort of a deep passion and love for like that very core part of the business. And then I think for me, it was really sort of like the love on the consumer facing side and building a brand and working with creators that really resonated. And so we just sort of like teamed up and started working on this.
Nice. That's magic, man. You know what I always find so interesting is like, because you guys are doing some really cool stuff. Um, Obviously you worked with Zias on Wing SZN.
Yep.
You worked with Pomp on Bitcoin Pizza.
Yep.
Countless other influencers, like really cool space. And then it's interesting just to hear your story of like chopping onions in the back and then like kind of going to different startups and then even just like a blog post.
Yeah.
Like you just put out a blog post online.
Yeah.
Like you don't even have any.
I think you just sort of have to like do it, right? Because like even like when I was at that grocery delivery company, the place I really wanted to work was Uber Eats. But I
Mm,
was like 19, college dropout, never hearing back from the recruiter. Ended up running Facebook ads about myself targeting Uber employees. And ended up meeting this guy named Akshay,
yeah.
who was on marketing at Eats at the time, and like we just started waffling ideas back and forth, and realized that food is basically content, right? If you go and look at Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, like food is one of the biggest categories.
Mm,
Um, and I think you just sort of have to like one like do each day as its own, but also just sort of like take action and just sort of like keep doing stuff generally.
yeah. I think you know what it is. I even put out because I recently left my job to do the podcast full
Mm,
time, right? And I put out this tweet on my Twitter about like just like the burning the boats, like people.
yeah,
It's a very like romanticized thing, like burning the boats. Um, and I think it makes it seem like there's just like one moment where you just have this amazing idea and you just go all in and you just do this thing. But it's not really like that. It's like I feel, and even your story kind of shows this.
mm,
You kind of have to be in the arena first. Like you kind of just have to be doing something first,
yep,
even if it's just having like conversations with people that are in the industries that you're in.
right.
Um,
Yeah, you just have to start.
yeah.
And like when we started this, uh, the operational model was completely different.
Mm,
Or at least sort of in it before we even like did anything. Like we put together like a deck and a story and like all this stuff. Just to like start having those conversations, right? And like quickly realize, what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve and what is the best way to solve that problem. And learn that like if we wanted to actually do that, then we would need to change out the operational back end.
mm,
Um, even from like the first career that we launched to the types of people that we're working with now, complete like night and day difference, right? Both in terms of type and then also just like scale. And I think to that point, like you have to just sort of like start, but then once you start, you have to sort of like go all the way with the things that you're doing.
mm, mm. You know what it is? It's as well how I think about it. At first, and to be honest, throughout there's a ton of uncertainty and like not knowing exactly what's going to happen next. But there will be moments where you just have, at least for me, I'll just have like moments of clarity where I'm like, okay, this is what I need to do. Like this thing is working a bit.
Yeah.
All like hell to leather, like just go in on this thing.
Yep.
Um, but I think I find that the moments of uncertainty, being able to navigate that, and like you even mentioned, obviously that you dropped out of college.
Mm.
Um, dive in a bit into that decision. Like even when you did that, what were you dropping out of college for? It was really just Uber Eats.
No, no, no. So I let's see. So I grew up in the South,
Yeah.
Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, sort of like all over the place. Um, and I was always like really interested in tech and specifically around like design, like design. Um, and sort of like, you know, grew up on Twitter, connecting with people, giving me projects to do, things like that. And ended up visiting SF the summer after my freshman year of high school, and like rode in a Tesla and visited like the Google office, right, and
Yeah.
like all this stuff, and sort of like for a kid that was growing up in Georgia, like that was like a huge deal for me.
Yeah.
Um, and just sort of like realize like this is sort of where I need to be, and like what's the fastest path to like getting there. And so throughout high school and even in like my freshman year of college, which is like doing internships as much as I could, just like give me work to
Mm.
do. And I ended up doing a internship after my freshman year of college at this company called Bellhops in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is the tech-enabled moving company essentially.
Okay.
And that was like a great experience for me just because I was learning so much just from like doing stuff and like being on a team, and like you get to be creative, but you also get to like solve hard problems and all these things. And so I ended up basically just like staying on after that internship. They offered me a job, and I just like was like, yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Nice.
And I ended up staying for like an additional like 2 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And when I talk about like earlier I mentioned this sort of like intersection of the digital and physical worlds, like what I mean by that is it's not like a SaaS company, right? It's a company that has like a real physical world like implication to it.
Yeah.
And I think that really excites me, is like when you can actually like move objects.
Yeah.
Um, and so while I was at Bellhops, I both did like product management and product design, but I also built out like the logistics side of the business. And like learning that and like building a team for the first time, and like running a sales process, and having ops managers, and like all this stuff, like that is really what sort of triggered this idea of like starting a business, and um like making a vision come to life.
Yeah. You know what's interesting when I hear your story, it reminds me of that like the Steve Jobs quote. Um, you can never connect the dots looking forward, only looking backwards. Like it only really the steps only make sense in hindsight.
Yeah.
Never really when you're experiencing it. And I think for that reason, in the moments when you're kind of in it, there's a lot of doubt because you're also thinking, you're like, where is this all going? Like, where is it all going to match up? I'm curious if that was your experience. Like, even like the dropping out of college,
Mm.
having to figure out like the logistics side of a business and being like young. Like, was there self doubt? You like, what the fuck am I even doing?
I don't think there's ever been like self doubt per se.
Yeah.
Um, that's an interesting quote. That's the first time I'm hearing that. I think you have to have like a general idea of like where you want to be in
Mm,
life, maybe. Like, so for me, like I have an endpoint.
mm,
And the way I get there is sort of like flexible.
mm,
And it'll change, and maybe like that will change the endpoint, right? But like um generally like I'm going towards a final like destination, and I'm open to the different ways of getting there. And decisions sort of come to you, or opportunities sort of come to you, and you have to sort of like pick which ones make sense for you to do.
mm,
um and you might have a bunch of information that like helps you pick one opportunity over the other, or you might not, and you just have to sort of like guess.
mm,
um and I think like the dropping out of school and things like that were just sort of like shortcuts to get to that final destination faster.
mm. I like that. I like that. Yeah, you need a certain amount of flexibility, and I like that you said it's like a shortcut.
Yeah, and I think the flexibility piece is important, right? The opportunity, like you should be available for that like 7 p.m. like random text that's like, hey, can you go and meet with this person real quick?
Mm,
Right. And like without naming names, like things like that have actually happened with Popchew, and
mm,
we've gotten to meet like crazy people who we never thought we would be meeting with and working with less than a year from starting the company.
mm.
um and you just, yeah, I think like that's like one of the bigger things about like being a founder also is just um sort of like being open to seizing the opportunities that come your way.
Yeah. What would you say? That's an interesting point. What would you say is like? and you can obviously disclose as much as you want. Um, what's like the craziest room that you've been in? You just looked around and been like,
Yeah. I can't disclose names, but I would say like I've definitely been in a couple of studios with like, extremely famous hip hop artists at this point.
mm,
Have been to their houses and just like sort of hung out, played 2K. Um so it's been a ton of fun and like, again in the moment like there's a normal person, right? And you're not a fan or anything, right? You're just sort of there,
yeah,
and you're here to like discuss business, but also to like get to know them and like get them to uh be okay around you and be comfortable around you and be able to trust you, right? Because you're gonna go and the sort of like prop of our business is you are this like massive celebrity or massive talent who has millions and millions of fans all across the world, and we're going to take that and build a product around it that your fans are going to love, right? And
mm,
so that takes a lot of trust between the company Popchew and that artist or that talent, right? Because they're putting their trust into us that we're going to
mm,
protect this reputation that they have they've built their entire lives. And so that sort of like social setting is I think actually really important for that trust to sort of like happen.
yeah,
And for them to not only hear about the business but also to hear about like myself and about the company and like why we exist and um why they can or why they should trust us.
yeah. What's interesting? I feel like, especially even going to university and then coming into the working world, you always hear like the term like networking, going to these events
Yeah.
and whatever, and building relationships. And I feel like in a lot of ways it overcomplicates everything because at the base it's just like, is this like a cool person?
Yeah.
It's like, would I want to spend time with this person? And like the relationship kind of just starts off that foundation.
Right.
And then the business or the networking, I guess, it all just naturally builds off of that.
Yep.
Like you're going to want to work with people that you actually like. Um, and I think it's beneficial for people to just hear that, like just be a cool person, like be someone that people would want to be around.
Right.
And then everything will naturally follow from that point. Um, actually, you mentioned the end goal, like having an end goal in mind.
Sure.
Like you kind of know your end point. What would you say your end point is?
uh I guess like tricky question. I think for me that endpoint is it's not like a specific thing. I guess it's more of a like when you arrive you'll know what it is.
Mm,
And
like a feeling, you're saying.
yeah, it's a feeling, right? And so it's because for me like I don't ever want to necessarily like stop,
Mm,
right? It's like um there's always going to be more to do and as long as like I'm having fun doing it then like you might as well continue.
mm.
There's actually a really long like Drake interview. It's like 3 hours long.
I've probably
Um,
seen it. Every
and
interview with Drake, I'm
yeah,
on it.
and the interviewer asks him, like, "Are you ever gonna retire?" He like names off like a couple of other rappers that are like sort of settled down and you don't like really hear about them much. And Drake is like, "I'm never gonna stop. Like, I'm living the life. This is it. And I'm just like never gonna stop."
Mm,
Um, and I think that's like true for like a lot of founders too, right? Is like, uh, you, I think like fall in love with like building things, um, and just like the process. And
yeah.
I think the other thing that's interesting that I've sort of like realized is through all the different companies I've worked at now, and now Popchew, the it's you're solving a lot of the same things, but it's like a different context.
Mm,
Or like you're using a lot of the same tools or ideas, but it's a different context. And so I think you sort of like figure out these patterns that you can go and take into like whatever other businesses that you end up starting.
mm,
Um, and I think that's maybe like what makes it fun, right? Is like you figured out the pattern and now you get to sort of apply it in different ways
mm,
and sort of like figure out like, okay, can I go and, you know, try and solve this other thing with these like patterns I've learned. And so it's like kind of like a puzzle
mm.
in a game. And I think if as long as you sort of like love that game and love that process, then I don't think you would want to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. It's interesting what you say about Drake. Um, and I think a lot of people that are actually like elite at their craft, that's the way they see it. They see it as like a
Yeah,
craft.
I call it greatness, right? And so
Yeah.
it's You have like your Kobe's or your Drake's or like Michael Jordan, like LeBron, like all these types of
Mm,
people. And a lot of them are like athletes, right? But there's also like a bunch of these people in business as well.
mm,
And I think the sort of like common uh thing between them all is sort of like practice, meaning that like they show up and they do the work.
mm.
And they sort of like let that be like a core part of their life, right? Is like this thing, it's like an obsession with this like thing that they want, like
Yeah.
for themselves, or a thing that they're obsessed about like in life, right? Whether that's like the sport that they're playing or the business that they're working on or whatever it is.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was watching an interview with Michael Rubin. Do
Mhm.
you, do you know who that is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like CEO of Fanatics. He's a billionaire at this point. Like started a bunch of successful
Mhm.
companies. Um, and he was saying, I think he must be like in his 40s or 50s.
Mhm.
And he was like, I have never been more energized and motivated than I am right now.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people think that like when you're in your 20s, that's kind of like when you're trying to work, you're trying to build. That's when you're gonna have your most motivation. He's like, nah, right now, most motivated I've been.
Yeah. But I think that also maybe makes sense in the uh idea of like this like finding patterns in like the work that you're doing,
Mm,
because if you get to 50 and your whole life has been constructed of finding patterns, now you've sort of like found a lot of them and you're just applying them, and you have a bunch of money and resources to sort of like go and like push harder.
yeah,
um and so I think that's like the other piece is like, sort of day one, job one. um you don't really know what you're doing, right? You're sort of just there, you're absorbing a bunch of information. You're sort of like figuring it out as you go.
yeah,
And then sort of like the second job that you have, like, okay, like now I've like learned some things about like how to interact with people or how to like, like run a meeting or like whatever it is,
yeah.
right? And then now job number three, it's like, okay, great, like now I know how to like run a business.
Mm,
And I mean, Michael Rubin has started like 4 or 5 different companies at this point,
mm,
right? And they all have like a very similar sort of like pattern to them.
yeah,
And so I think like your confidence grows as you sort of like go through the sequence of like doing more and more.
yeah. It's actually, you know what I was thinking? That must be such an addictive thing because it's actually a beautiful moment where everything that you've been doing over a number of years is kind of all converging and coming together at once.
Yep.
So it's like your confidence is building. His network is obviously like ridiculous. Like it's
Yep.
like other billionaires. So you have like access to capital, network, your experience. So you know exactly, there's always going to be a bit of uncertainty, but you have a better sense of like what to do.
Hmm.
It's like he's been building to this moment. And he's like really good friends with Robert Kraft, obviously the guy that owns the Patriots. And he was like, that guy's 70 and he has even more energy than I do. Like he's always like jetting around and doing things. And I think it's just what you're saying. It's like you've been building this. It's almost like they're like when LeBron was like in his prime at like 28 or whatever, and he has like a mix of experience. He's still in his athletic like prime.
Hmm.
He's still explosive, but he also knows how to get it done.
Hmm.
Probably the most exciting time in his career because he's
Totally.
like bringing everything together.
But throughout like his whole life, right, he has like something to prove,
Mm,
right? Like when he's, first in the league, right, he has to sort of prove that he's worth it in a lot of ways,
mm,
right? And then sort of like as he sort of becomes quote unquote like the GOAT, he has to like prove that he is, right? And then
mm,
once he is, uh then he has to maintain it, right? And so you sort of keep having to like do this work, and like push yourself even once you're at the top to
mm,
like keep being in the top.
mm. You know what it is? It's like there's a career arc. And even with LeBron, you see it very clearly, right? Like he comes into the league, he's like kind of almost like a prodigy. Like he's like the um people are already comparing him to like Jordan and like
Mm.
putting him on that sort of level. And then obviously he comes in, he's great. And then expectations increase even more. And now they're like, okay, when's he gonna win a ring? And then he has like the series with Dallas and like what happened there. And people are like, maybe he just can't do it. Like that's the doubt, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the something to prove. He overcomes that. Like there's an arc to his career, and now he's kind of, I don't even know what he's in right now because he's like he's too good given his age. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't even really make sense. If you were gonna reflect on um your own journey, because you're early, but you've already proven a lot. Like you've already done a lot. I'm curious. Like, do you even think about it like that? Do you even think like do you think you've done a lot, or are you less like I'm just getting started? Like this is
Yeah, I think I'm just getting started.
hmm.
Uh,
Why?
because like the stuff of my past is not really uh like when I think about sort of like the life I want to live or like the things I want to do, like that was just like the baby stuff to like get me to where I am now, which is like the actual like this is like what I want to be doing, which is like building a business and like making it, the greatest thing in the world.
Mm,
Um and so like we're just at like day one, like just at the starting line of like making this a thing.
mm,
Um and I also think like maybe that's just like the way that like everyone feels, that sort of like, operating with this mindset is like it's always sort of like this like day one attitude.
mm.
Um so
Yeah. Let's talk about actual day one. So you guys obviously you raised 3.6 million in seed funding. Um,
yeah, so we raised 3.6 I guess like a year and a half ago at this point.
mhm.
And then we raised an additional 3 shortly after that actually. So total, funding up to this point is around 6.5 million.
Okay, sick. You have some like pretty cool investors on your cap table. Jake Paul, Pomp, Long Journey Ventures, right? They
Yeah,
led you
so
around.
yep, Long Journey Ventures led the round. We brought on Wonderco, which is like Jeffrey Katzenberg, Anthony Soleil. We brought on a handful of founders. The founder of Vine, the founder of Complex. Um, yeah, a great like group of people, like product people from Uber Eats, DoorDash, people from uh Postmates, like all across the board. And we sort of like broke up the round into, there's like 3 key categories of the company,
Mm,
right? There's consumer, like consumer product, consumer brand. There's the creator talent side, and then there's sort of the third like operational bucket. And so it was important to us to find investors across all 3.
mm,
Um, and especially on the creator side, just because like coming into this, we didn't have a network in talent at all. And so like, Jake Paul came in and opened up his network for us through Anti Fund. Um, and yeah, it's been a great sort of uh journey, just from like starting to like getting funded and now to like where we are.
yeah. How does that even come about? Like when a Jake Paul comes in and invests in your
Yeah.
company, like how does that even happen?
Yeah, yeah. So, Jake has a business partner named Jeff. And Jeff is sort of like a serial founder.
Mm,
Had 2 or 3, 4 different companies. Um, Super smart guy. And Jake also like super super sharp, and um, obviously is like a huge creator. Who has since pivoted into like boxing.
yeah.
Um,
Taking over boxing.
Right, and
Yeah.
when you think about like patterns, again, the same sort of thing, right? It's like how do you be the greatest at YouTube is actually probably not that different than how do you be the greatest at boxing.
Mm,
Um, sort of like at the fundamental level, right? It's just about like putting in the work, essentially.
yeah.
Um, and uh, and so the first launch that we actually did was with Pomp. We did Bitcoin Pizza.
Mm,
And then Pomp had dinner with Jeff and Jake, and then made the intro. And then over the course of like the next like month or so, as we were raising, we got them in, and yeah, it's been great to have them.
yeah. So you actually met like Jake and his whole is
Yeah,
it
have met Jeff, talked to Jake, FaceTimed him a few times, and over text. Like if I need a relationship with someone, or if I need to go and talk to someone, I hit him up, and
yeah.
it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What they're building, it's like so fucking impressive. Um and not even just the talent. Like not even just when you see him on a YouTube video and like the
Mhm.
charisma or whatever, or when you see him in the ring and like the way he can fight. It's like the strategic, like the mindset to it, like bringing everything around.
Yeah.
It's just impressive. Um Might even be a bit of a weird question, but like even when you spoke to him or like when you even met people in his team, was there anything that like stood out that you were like, because it's when you're a viewer, you
Mhm.
see like one side of them,
Mhm.
and then I feel like when you actually meet them, especially if they're doing like impressive shit,
Yeah.
was there anything where you were just like, oh, like it makes sense. Like
Yeah.
the fact that they've achieved this, it makes sense
No,
to
I
me.
mean, I think he asked like a lot of really good questions.
Mm,
Like he understood the business and like why it would make sense, but he wanted to make sure that like we were the right people to be working on it, and so he had to
mm,
ask questions related to that. I mean, he had questions about the product and the experience, as well, right? Like, how is this gonna work? And like trying to actually get into the details of it. And I thought that was actually pretty impressive that like he cared about like those types of things,
mm,
and not just like leaving it to like Jeff to handle or anything like that, right? Like Jake actually cares about the companies that they're investing in.
yeah.
And I think with like other, people that I've met, like, the hip hop artist, for example, he was, I think, just like genuinely curious. He was like, talking about TikTok and like, what's like the formula for like blowing up on TikTok. And we were just like having a conversation about just like, the randomest things like that.
Mm,
Who for like, a giant hip hop artist, like that's not something that you sort of like expect to have a conversation about.
yeah. Just like learning, just like
Yeah,
constantly
just like
curious.
learning and asking a ton of questions, and because I think maybe it's recognizing the opportunities that are in front of you, right? And for me, it's like a huge opportunity to be with this person and like be doing a deal, to build a brand with them. But for them, like maybe they're also thinking it through it as like, okay, this like, kid is in front of me.
Mm,
Like what can I get from him?
yeah. I love that. It's funny. I remember I haven't thought of this in years. I watched this YouTube video like years ago, and it was like quite a big like social media influencer guy. He has like a YouTube channel, and he went to a party in LA, and he says Elon Musk is at the party, and he's like talking to him, and obviously it's like Elon Musk, so he's like fucking excited, like he's like
Sure.
really excited. So he says he speaks to him for like 10 minutes, and he says, "Oh, I've got all these questions in my mind, like I want to ask Elon because he's like a business kind of guy." Um, he's like, I talked to Elon for 10 minutes, and he was like, I'm so excited, I'm just talking, 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 and Elon's like asking me questions, right?
Yeah.
And then the 10 minutes goes by, and then the conversation just kind of ends. And he's like, Elon asked me a bunch of questions about like business or like what I was building on YouTube and like all these things. I didn't ask the guy a single question. Like I didn't like I was so excited to meet him and
Hmm.
like find out all this shit and like how he's built this. And literally he just listened to me talking. And it's funny. I feel like it would be a common trait like people at that level have, which is like they're really good at learning and they're
Yeah.
very curious.
Yeah, I think
Um,
curiosity is really important. And I think like knowing sort of like when to speak and how to speak is also like super important. Like
yeah,
you have to be able to communicate really well, I think.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so you mentioned obviously Pomp and Zias. Those were like the first two like big creators that you
Yeah, I
guys
think
worked with.
Zias, so for those that don't know, Zias is a YouTuber. He's like 4.5 million subscribers. A lot of like hip hop related content.
Yeah,
Friends with a bunch of like really big like Twitch streamers and YouTubers as well.
such a dope creator, such a funny like
Yeah, and he's
yeah,
been in the game for a while too.
yeah.
Um, and just like ton of experience in relationships. And so, we launched a wing brand with him. And that was like our first real like quote unquote like influencer that we launched. And ton of fun also because like it was the learning process for our team,
Mm,
first one that we're doing basically. Um, and came up with a bunch of like really cool concepts and flavors. So we ended up doing a wing brand,
mm,
called Wing SZN. And there's like a hot orange soda wing, which like you wouldn't find anywhere else, right?
yeah.
And then he came by about a month ago or so so we have a test kitchen in Nolita here in New York.
Okay.
Um, and we ran through a bunch of new flavors that we're testing with him as well. So we did like a PB&J flavor, we did a bubblegum flavor, and just like you
That's
would never
crazy.
see those
Yeah,
on wings, right? But they like
yeah.
they taste incredible.
I need to
Um,
try the bubblegum flavor. That's crazy.
yeah, and so yeah, I mean, it's just like kind of fun like working with creators, just because like they are creative, like that's the whole thing.
Mm,
And I think like at the end of the day, like food is also like sort of like creative act of like making something that uh hasn't existed before, or trying to put a spin on it, or how can you like make this thing pop. And we have like our chefs are equally creative and super talented, so it's like it's fun to sort of like see sort of like Zeke and like our chef like come together and like whip something up.
Yeah.
And then they're here shooting content and a bunch of stuff like that, like in the kitchen and showing the behind the scenes process of like how this thing comes together for their fans, which I think is like another really big part of sort of this process for us is sort of like the content side. And I think sort of in the future it'll be like a much bigger like part of like what we do, but content should be sort of like underlying everything that we're doing because it's like a great marketing channel for us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And I think the best content is like really authentic
Yep.
content. And it's funny because I was listening to the Nelk Boys they were talking about because they have their company Happy Dad,
Mm-hmm.
like their seltzer brand. And there's been other like celebrities that have kind of tried like doing these sort of products.
Yeah.
And they were talking about why they think theirs was successful. And they were like, before we even launched, we were just like testing product for like a year
Yeah.
and a half.
I
Like
think
we
what
were
a-
really involved in the actual thing.
Exactly. I think what a lot of people sort of forget is it's not just about having millions of followers or about like being able to apply your name and logo to like a product and shipping it out the door.
Yeah.
First, like you have to have like an actually like engaged community of fans who
Mm.
like really love you for you and not necessarily just like one element of you.
Yeah.
Um, and then two, like the product actually has to be really good.
Yeah.
Right? Because for us, all of our food for the most part is like hot food, right? And hot
Mm.
meaning like it's like food delivery food. It's not like shipped products.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's really important that we sort of like nail one the taste, but then like how can you go and make that consistent whether you're ordering in LA or New York,
Mm.
right? Because it's coming out of different kitchens. So how is it possible that you're able to do this? And I think we spent like our first year and a half really just sort of like nailing down the operations and like
Mm.
shout out to like Nick and the ops team for that because I think that's going to be like huge for us this year is that like we've built this like network of partners, restaurant partners and kitchen partners that are just like super solid. And now there's like the foundation that we can go and layer brands on top of.
Mm. That's so cool, man. And I love what you said about like it's not just the influence in the audience. It's like the product has to be great.
Yep.
And what came to mind for me is like if you're a fan or you're someone that follows that influencer, you don't even just want a great product. You want to feel like when you're consuming the product, it's like you're getting a piece of the influencer.
Yeah.
You want it to be like exactly what you said, like with
It needs to
Z.
be a product experience.
Yeah.
And I think like one of the big things that we're working on right now actually is like redoing all of our packaging. Really to sort of go after this like product experience where if you're ordering Zeke's wings, like you don't want it to just show up in like a plain gray container with like no
Mm.
branding on it, right? Like you want a sort of like immersive almost like experience where it's like a fully branded package, you open it up and like it sort of like wows you.
Mm.
Um and I think like we're sort of like balancing a bunch of things, right? Like the experience needs to be good, but also like the price point can't be too high because like most of our customers are, like 16 through,
Yeah.
like
Has to be
25.
affordable.
So it needs to be affordable. And then it's also food, right? So it's like a thing that you're going to consume and then it's going to be completely gone. And so again, it can't be expensive. And then also, we really want you to sort of like love this like one thing, right? Maybe you come in for the wings, but then you stay for some other influencers like chicken tenders, and you like have that the next time, right? And
Mm.
then like once you've tried that, like okay, maybe like Popchew starts like doing like some of our like our own stuff, right? Maybe you have like a burger or something like that, and now you can just come to Popchew just for the Popchew burger.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that the food is really good so that we create you as a sort of like returning user.
Yeah. I love that when we initially spoke, I love that about what you said, which is like, it's not just that we're partnering with these influencers and doing products for them, which is obviously like a big piece of what you do,
Mhm.
but it's also we're trying to establish the brand. So it's like, we just create quality like food.
Right.
Like we're just, and so you might have come because of Zias, but then you also have like the Bitcoin pizza with Pomp. You're like, oh, this is fire too.
Right.
Um, let's bring it back a bit. Tell me, like, how did you even meet Zias? Like, how did that relationship even start?
Zias, interesting. Again, like networking is like the name of the game.
Yeah.
Um,
When you say networking, like, what does that mean? Like, what are you doing?
just like taking meetings
Mm.
and like meeting people. And then they're introducing me to other people.
Yeah.
And I'm going and like talking to them.
Do you even with Zias, for instance, do you even remember like the first
I don't
piece of
even
outreach you did
no,
that like started the process?
not at all.
Okay.
It all starts with like starting this company, right? And then it sort of
Yeah.
like branches out from there. Um, we got his manager Parker. Parker invested in Popchew.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure who introduced us to Parker.
Mm.
Um, you can go back in my email and find it. But uh yeah, so Parker invested and then was like, "Hey, like I have this guy um who I think this would be a great fit for."
Mm.
And made the introduction to Zias. Zias was all over it and then we just did it.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think that was like a great sort of like pairing. And then Parker introduced us a lot to this world as well in the sense of like um he's like an agent, right? And so he's going and getting deals for various talent, and he sort of like opened our eyes into like how that world works and how the deals are made and like how you can move them along faster and things like that, which we're able to incorporate ourselves.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And then okay, so you meet Zias. He's all over it, like you say. What are those initial conversations like? Was it always even like obviously you guys do wings?
Yeah.
Was it always just wings, or was it like might do pizza, might do burgers? Like what was
Yeah.
even the
There was
initial?
there was a lot of different ideas initially. There was wings, there was burgers, there was like fried chicken. There was a handful of different ideas, and we basically whittled it down to wings, just because like he loved wings, he knew his fans loved wings. There's also like some polling that was done amongst his fans to see like
Mm,
what would they want to see.
yeah, that's
And I
sick.
think that's like one of the actually really fun things that we've sort of like done along the way with him is incorporate the fans into the product and like the experience where they're helping come up with the names of the flavors. They're helping come
Mm,
up with the actual flavors themselves. They're coming to the taste tests and sort of like rating the food for themselves before
yeah.
we're as we're working on it. They're coming to like the meetups and the launch events. So um I think we've done a good job of sort of like incorporating the fans into like what we're building, because
Mm,
I think the other sort of thing that you have to remember is, um, the sort of idea like in a traditional company or traditional like tech company, you do like user research, and
mm,
this is the exact same thing.
mm,
Our users just happen to be fans, and the product is food.
mm.
And so we have to go and get them in the same place and see what they think about it.
Yeah. No, that's sick. That's sick. Um, okay. So you decide on the wings, the flavors. You start rolling it out. Um, what were even like the first few launches like?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure like you guys were just learning like a shit ton. Like it was just
We were
like
learning a ton, but yeah, I mean, any sort of startup journey is peaks and valleys.
yeah,
And so I mean, the first launch that we did was not amazing.
yeah,
I think we actually like screwed up a good amount. But it was like a huge learning point for the team in terms of how do we actually launch successfully the next time.
yeah.
And now I mean, Wing Season operates out of like over 150 locations across the country.
Mm,
Cleared $1 million last year.
nice.
And we just did the Super Bowl yesterday, and people love wings on Super Bowl Sunday, so did super well. Um, but it's been like a big learning process to figure out a handful of things. Like one, like how do you interact with talent? Because
Mm,
they are super busy and they have a bunch of other stuff going on, and you're just like one of the things.
yeah.
Um, and so like how do you make it simple for them? Two, uh, on our side, right, on the side of like food quality and consistency and all these things, like how do we do that at scale? And also like I think we sort of gloss over this a little bit, but we launched a wing brand during literally the time when like no one was able to find wings in the US.
Mm,
And so if you go and Google like wings like 2019, like there's thousands of articles about how there's like a national wing shortage.
oh snap.
And we put together an entire wing brand during that time,
Yeah,
right? And so like figuring out how do we go and source these things, how do we distribute them across the country to all of our locations? It was a huge challenge, but the team like overcame and crushed it.
yeah, yeah. You know what's interesting? You and you've said it a few times, like the team, like you have this challenge, um, you learn from it, team figures it out, we crush it. Um, how did you even go about like building a team?
Yeah. Good question. I think.
Because you face so many. I think in your business especially, there's so many different types of challenges. It's not
Yeah.
just like you're figuring out one thing.
Yep.
So how do you even build a team that can handle all of that?
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I mean, I think like you need like really great people if you're gonna go and do really great things.
Mm,
And so, uh, I mean, the sort of like nitty gritty of finding the people, like nuts and bolts is a lot of them came from the network.
mm,
Our first engineer was someone I previously worked with. Our first sales guy was someone that Nick, previously worked with. Our first ops guy was someone that Nick previously worked with.
mm.
Our second ops guy is a guy I met at a party. And he was in our office the next week.
Yeah.
Right. And so you sort of have to, again, the networking piece is important and maintaining relationships is important because like those relationships will come down the road and be able to help you.
Yeah.
Um, and I think like sort of like some of the elements that we look for, there's a handful, but um, you definitely need like drive because this isn't like a 9 to 5 type of job.
Yeah.
You want to sort of like be more than yourself, meaning that like you are attracted to the mission of like what we're building and the possibility of what it could be one day.
Mm,
I think that's really important that you see the potential of what this can be because you are in charge of making it happen or making
mm,
that potential come to life. Um, uh, this other piece around like sort of living it, meaning we work at sort of this intersection of pop culture and food,
mm,
and so if you can sort of like live that pop culture yourself, if that's something that you find interesting, if you wear Jordans, right? If you like
mm.
love Nike, if you know what Kith is, like all that kind of stuff, right? But also if you like love good food, like that all sort of like makes you a part of like what we're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think from there it's like, sort of pretty standard stuff, right? Like you have to sort of be someone that can adapt because, every day isn't the same.
Mm,
And people that started in sales have moved over to ops.
mm,
Um and so it's really good to find people that have sort of like interchangeable skills, um, where they can be like used in multiple places. Um, both from our standpoint, right? Because like maybe we need someone in ops and we don't necessarily need someone in sales right now. But
mm,
also from their standpoint, you want someone who also like has that curiosity and wants to learn and grow
mm,
themselves and do a bunch of different things.
mm. That's interesting. You know what? This might be really slow on my part, but like, when you said we're at the intersection of pop culture and food,
Yeah,
I was like, oh, the Popchew name, like it makes sense now.
yeah,
Like literally the
yeah,
perfect
literally,
combination.
yeah.
That's cool. Okay, let's switch to Pomp
Okay,
because and it's funny actually.
the palm story is a
Um,
good one.
yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's start with it. Break it down.
Okay, so when Nick and I like started all of this,
Yeah.
all we had was like him and I in a deck that we put together on like the floor of my apartment in New York.
Yeah.
And this like apartment was like depressing. There's no lights, so it got like
There's
when
no
it got dark
lights.
outside, it got dark in the apartment. So we basically worked till it got dark and then like end the day basically. Um there was like a Domino's across the street. We'd run, get a pizza. That was like our dinner, basically.
Yeah.
And I had no furniture. There was literally a mattress on the floor and a yoga mat. That's it. So you just sit on the floor and work. And we had this deck. We were pitching it around. Um, and basically we got introduced to Pomp like through this like pitch process. 'Cause he had a fund and knew a bunch of influencers from his podcast. Excuse me. And we pitched him, and he was like, "Look, I think the idea is like super interesting and compelling, but I'm not going to invest until I know this actually works." And so I think like literally like the next day, we sent him back a website, with his face and a box of pizza on it,
Yeah.
and said, "How about you be the first person that we launch? Let's prove to
Oh,
you
I
that
love
this
that.
works."
Yeah.
Um, and people don't know this, but a couple years ago, Pomp used to tweet out "bang bang" like all the time. That was like his catchphrase was "bang bang."
Yeah.
And he would always talk about like every week. I think it was like on Wednesdays or something. He would go and get Domino's.
Yeah.
That was just like their weekly tradition. And so like we literally call it like Bang Bang Pizza when we sent it to him.
Okay. Nice. Nice.
And he came back and was like, "Look, I love the idea, I love the hustle." And his like wife really loved it too. And he was like, "Let's do it.
Mm.
Let's call it Bitcoin Pizza instead."
Yeah.
And then like let's make it blow up. And so we launched it. It was again just like myself, Nick. We had this intern named Tyler who's now like full time running sales at
Mm.
Popchew. Um and yeah, we just sort of like pulled it together and made it happen. And we were just like, buying tablets on Amazon to ship to our restaurants and like, really crappy like Amazon Fire tablets that like are super buggy and everything.
Yeah.
We like, scraped together like a website where you could go and like place your order. And we sort of just like made it happen. And uh yeah, I mean the day of launch we did like a New York launch party in Washington Square Park. Hundreds of people came through. Bill Gates was actually just like there, which was also kind
Really?
of random and crazy. Um, and yeah, it was a ton of fun, and we did like I think close to like $100,000 in a week.
Yeah.
And from that is how we kicked off our actual seed round. So Pomp became I think one of our first investors, maybe the first investor. And then Long Journey came in, decided to lead the round, and then got in a bunch of others. Flybridge here in New York, Wonderco that we talked about. Yeah, that was a great one. And then obviously Pomp has been really helpful in making the Jake intro and like other intros as well.
Yeah.
And then being a good sounding board for the business as well because when we started again, like the whole idea was like platform and like it's from day one we're gonna have this sort of like marketplace idea where like any influencer can come in and create any food brand and like it's just gonna work.
Yeah.
And Pomp, sort of like helped us sort of like focus and again, I think like he is very much sort of out of the way, like uh in the sense like he's not telling you what to do, but he's sort of like providing his opinion.
Mm.
And it's funny that like where we sort of like ended up is a mix of both sort of like what he was thinking, but also like what we were thinking in the early days.
Mm.
And so sort of like, both a little bit of both of our predictions like ended up coming true.
Yeah. That's such a sick story, man. It's funny as well because I was like, even when like thinking about this podcast, I was thinking about like who's the audience, like who's the target,
Yeah.
and I was like, I even put it on my Twitter. I was like, I'm making content for like dreamers and hustlers.
Mm.
And when you say that story about you guys came up with the website, I'm like, that is it right there. Like,
Yeah.
talk
And-
to me even about that. Because the thing is, you must be like, you're pitching him, right?
Yep.
And you get the feedback, and I can see a lot of people being discouraged with the feedback,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. I mean,
What prompted the website? Like, who came up with that?
Yeah. So, we actually had this, a friend of mine named Jen, shout out Jen, she's also an angel investor in
Yeah.
Popchew, but, Jen was working with Justin Kahn at the time, and maybe still does. And,
Justin Khan.
Twitch.
Twitch guy, yeah.
And so, uh, myself, Nick, and Jen, we got on like a Zoom after that email. We were just like talking, like, like what do we do now? Like who else do we go to like do the first launch? And like as we were having that conversation, Jen's like, why don't you just like tell him that he should be the first one? And we're like, oh crap, that's actually really smart.
Yeah.
And then I think it was like myself or Nick, I don't remember who was like, wait, and then we should call it Bang Bang Pizza. And then that was like a moment of like it felt like a moment of genius. And he just sort of like, literally like within the next like several hours, like put together a website and everything.
Yeah.
And sent it to him.
Yeah.
So
I just love it. Because the thing is, right, he was like, he obviously liked you guys and he liked the idea, but he wanted to know if it can be executed.
Right.
And like, what's the best way to show him it could be executed?
Right.
Like, we're already hustling. Like, we're going to build some shit right now and show you.
Yeah. And I think like, again, huge props to him because he is the first person to like take a risk on us in the sense of like putting his brand and his reputation on the line for like what we were trying to do without ever seeing the product, right? Like he just sort of trusted that on launch day this was just gonna work.
Yeah.
He never tasted anything, never saw anything, and then launch day happened and it worked. But he like had that trust in us, which was really great.
Yeah. Okay, we've obviously spoke about Zias and Pomp. Can you maybe give one thing for each person, just working with them that that stood out? Because I kind of have my perspective as like the viewer of their
Sure.
content, but I'm curious what you would say actually like
Yeah.
knowing them,
I
interacting.
think Pomp is very encouraging,
Mm,
um and is always looking for a solution even when there's like a problem.
mm,
Um and I think that energy is like really, really great. Um Zias, I think the thing that's really great about him is like how in tune he is with his community that he's built over like the last several years that he's been doing YouTube.
mm,
Um, like he knows them super, super sharply.
mm,
And we actually just did last week. We talked to like 30 different users, all people that had like ordered Wing Season.
mm,
And asked them a bunch of questions, just, generally about Popchew and the app, and but also about Zias and like, why do you watch his content? Like, how did you find out about him? Why did you order his wings? Things like that.
mm,
And sort of like the resounding sort of like thing that they would say is his authenticity.
mm.
And I think that's just because of like how in touch he is with his fans.
Yeah, that's sick. That's sick. Okay, I'm curious how far does it go? Because we're in a really interesting, and I'm talking about you guys, but then also the space
Hmm.
more widely.
Yeah.
Because I think people are starting to see, like, oh, this is really like big.
Yeah.
Like you see what Mr. Beast did with like Beast Burger and um, opening like a brick and mortar location and like selling the most burgers, I think, in 24 hours.
Mm.
Um,
Prime just ran an
Prime,
ad
yeah,
yesterday.
Prime comes to mind. They're now the sponsor of the UFC. Probably like a mold. They're gonna probably be like $1 billion beverage company. Happy Dad and what Nelk are doing.
Mhm.
George Clooney, Casamigos, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, Terramana Tequila. How? Okay, you know what? Let me start with you guys first. How far do you, even with the influencers you're already working with,
Yeah.
how far do you think it goes? Are we going to be seeing Wing Season locations at every corner? Is it going to be like Starbucks, McDonald's? Like what?
I think so. Again, we're very early days, and so like
Yeah.
we have an opinion on the way the world should be, but it might not necessarily like work out that way, and maybe we end up going down a different path. But I think it's very important to us that Popchew is a consumer facing brand and company.
Mm,
Um, for a few different reasons. One, because it's important that both the creators that we work with as well as the customers know that they can trust us for food quality and that they can come back and try other people's menus and
mm,
other brands, and not have to build that trust from scratch again.
mm,
So being able to create that shared trust is really important. Two, it lets us have like a universal loyalty program.
mm,
And from sort of like the research that we've done and sort of like the stuff that we're working on, like we found that loyalty is like a very like important part, and there's actually like a ton of like fun ways that you can sort of like reward customers for coming back and again and again.
mm,
Um, and then I think three, there isn't necessarily like a like fast food or fast casual brand out there for pop culture or youth culture in general.
mm,
Right, you sort of have your your Subways and your like Burger Kings, and there's like definitely like McDonald's is crushing it, Taco Bell is crushing it, but like other than that, like who's crushing it?
mm,
Right, like a lot of them sort of like exist, and I think for us, like we sort of like want to go into that space and really sort of like make it pop and figure out like how do we go and make this a relatable thing,
mm,
um, that you love and is part of your own as a customer like identity and your own
mm,
your own brand. Um, and so maybe there's like wing season like corner spots, but I think in my mind there's also like a Pop Chew like flagship location in like every major city in the world that you can actually like, go inside of and have an experience, and you
yeah,
can go and order Zias's thing in that Pop Chew location.
yeah. That's cool. Like you could be, I almost think you could be like with a group of your friends. Maybe you're visiting New York, you're visiting LA for the first time. You go in a location and obviously you're like, you love YouTube or
Mm,
you're like, you spend a lot of time on that platform and you have Zias's Wings, you have Pomp's Pizza, maybe like another influencer you like. I don't know, like Chinese or something. Like it's a cool thing to just envision.
Yep.
I find it very cool when things that have started digital. So like as a fan, you just start off watching, like even with Zias, like I would watch like his obviously he would do like reaction videos.
Yeah.
But it wasn't even that. It was always like the freestyle that him and V Lu would do at the start of the video. And it's like you start with that and then it actually comes into, I think that's just such a powerful transition of like, it comes into the real world. And now you're like actually eating their product and like that
100%.
they tasted, they kind of built.
Yep. That yeah, exactly. And then it's really cool to sort of see it spread across the internet as well. And that's like the cool thing about content creators in general, right? And like we created this wing brand with Zias about a month ago. Zias was in LA and staying with Aiden. And Aiden ordered, probably like 20 orders of wings. And he and his bodyguard did like a mukbang live on Twitch.
Yeah.
And that has, millions of views, and people chop it up and put it on TikTok. And now it's like, million plus views on TikTok. And so it's like it's cool to sort of like see the content spread.
Yeah.
And the other like actually really cool thing has been that like Zeke's fans like truly love like the the brand that we've built, like Wing SZN. So much so that a few cool things. Like one, several fans have gone and created like review videos of them like going in and like ordering the wings and like reviewing them. One group went and like they sat in their car while they were eating the wings and like made a rap as they were like eating the wings about the wings, which was great. And then I was in this like user interviews that we were doing last week. One of the guys that I was talking to like sent me like a jingle that he made for Wing SZN, which is just like that's crazy, right? And it's like the love for the product is sort of like built in, because we're able to sort of like borrow sort of the community that this like person has built.
Yeah. No, it's just special. I think the community is special. I'm curious, do you have like, there's so many great creators out there, there's so many people that are building audience, and I don't know, there's people that come to mind for me, but you actually being in the space, is there one creator that you look at and you're like, this person needs to start, like, doesn't necessarily have to be like a food brand, but they need to start some sort of like, the love that they're getting from their audience is at a point where like they need to start some sort of product or something that just takes it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people like that I think make sense, right? We can like sort of like list a few. Drake, obviously. I think with Drake though, it's important that it's like a part of his like identity in a lot of ways, and like he pushes it often. Because he had a whiskey at some point, I believe, but I don't know if like how well it did. But if you look at like other things that Drake pushes, like steak, for example, sort of like the Bitcoin like gambling thing, like that's like a big part of his identity now, actually. And so I think he could actually start something like huge. Bad Bunny, like massive,
that would be crazy.
Massive.
That would be crazy.
And I think a lot of people in the US don't even realize like how huge he is, but he's like insane. I think in like October he sold 123 million dollars worth of tickets in like that 1 month alone, which is nuts. I think there's a bunch of other folks, Billie Eilish, huge community that loves her. And even like on some of the like smaller creators that are still like becoming like hugely popular, like Drewski, he's a huge one. It's been like gaining traction a ton.
I could see that would be such an easy. I could see him having like a food like something. That would be so easy.
Right. And then there's a bunch of other folks, right? There's like Lizzo, Doja Cat, a ton of people that make sense.
No, that's sick, man. That's sick. You know, when you talk about like the physical locations and like having one space where you can get like different products from different influencers. Where my mind goes, it's like the physical location, but then there's also like the digital, which is I know like obviously a lot of people order your products through like Postmates, DoorDash, like those sort of delivery apps. when you think about the ultimate vision, is there a point where people are just, instead of me going to DoorDash and ordering through that,
Yeah.
that you guys are just DoorDash?
Yeah. So the Popchew app is the thing. You
Yeah.
can go to the App Store and download Popchew.
Yeah.
And then there's also popchew.com. And you can order from there as well. And these are just sort of like V1 iterations of the app and the website. So a lot more to come. And so that's definitely the thing, is like we will be the destination for you to order your food experience from.
Mm.
And I think the other sort of like important point is we don't launch and work with just anybody. Meaning that going forward, right? So Zias and everything else going forward, there is a commonality amongst the types of people that we're launching. And that commonality is sort of this like pop culture, youth culture, like trend line that you see. So even in the people I listed out, like Drake, Drewski, Lizzo, Doja Cat, like those are very different people with like very different audiences, right? I would imagine like Lizzo's like listeners probably aren't, watching Kai Cenat,
Yeah.
right? But there is a shared community there still.
Yeah.
And that shared community is like youth culture.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of like the intersection that we're really operating at.
Yeah. Okay, sick. Okay, I have two final questions for you. The first one is, obviously you mentioned a bunch of creators. Who's the one that you're like, just me, like you personally, like not even just taking like the business,
Yeah.
like putting that to one side.
Sure.
Who's the one that you're like, if this person was working with us, not only would I like love to work with them,
Yeah.
but like we would kill it. Like us as a team, like everything, like we would kill it. Like make your pitch right now. Like who's the one person that comes to mind?
I think the one person would be, I think Drake, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, Drake has, the started from the bottom, now we're here. Like that's like a very legit thing. And he put that out a long time ago. Right? And so he's still come a long way. I think the way that he understands his audience is profound. He has sort of he's figured out the formula. But is also able to put out new stuff that sounds very different than his old stuff. But it still hits every single time. And I think that takes a level of sort of like knowing your audience, but also sort of like knowing what like good is. And so yeah, I think like Drake would crush it. I think Drake, if you're listening, we will crush this for you. But yeah, I think that would be a fantastic one.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna clip that, and like if Drake sees that or something,
sounds good.
I want like a care package, or I want just something,
We'll send you the care package for sure.
Yeah. Okay, sweet. Here's where I want to end. Obviously, you guys are like, you're building something really cool. You're building something in a space which is kind of like nascent. Like it's kind of, these are like the initial stages. Like this is the first time that these things are really happening, and you're seeing there's certain like pioneers in the space. I think whenever you're building something new, there's challenges. There's things that are difficult. There's not really like a clear path that's been trekked before you guys. What keeps you like awake at night? Like what are the biggest challenges? What is the stuff that you're like, that's the thing that we need to figure out next, that is gonna push us to the next level, help us get Drake or whoever else is
I think we have a lot of work to do, always. And there's always sort of like the constant pressure of like doing more yourself, but also you don't want to like burn yourself out and like hate what you're doing all of a sudden. But also I think there's a ton of work to do on the Popchew side in terms of building a brand and establishing a brand that is known for like making great, incredible food that's like unique and tied with influencers and tied with like, cool brands. Like in December, we did a launch with Doritos. And that was huge for us, right? Like working with someone of that scale and for a company of that scale to put their trust in us. And we built like a whole, menu with them. And so there's always more that we can do, but how can we go and sort of like use the opportunities in front of us to sort of like grow our own brand? And I think that's something that like I personally am like, thinking a lot about.
Yeah. Sick, man. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me.
It's
This
been
was
a
great.
lot of it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. Yeah. It'll be interesting in like, I don't know,
We'll follow
few
up in a
years from
year.
now, yeah.
We'll follow up.
and just see if Drake's on board.
Yeah.
and
Have you
see what's
seen
happening.
Billie Eilish does a video with Vanity Fair every year? And I think
No.
she's on like year 5 or 6 at this point.
Okay.
And it's the exact same questions that they ask her.
Yeah.
And they will ask her the question, and then they'll play like the previous year's answers, and then she'll give
that's
like the
sick.
new answer.
Yeah.
And it's like it's actually really cool to see, right? Because like some of them are like basic questions, like how many followers do you have, right? And you can see it from like 3 million to like 130 million or whatever it is now. Like who's the like biggest person in your phone, right? And it's like some like random influencer. Now it's like Drake or something, right?
Yeah.
And it's like cool to see that progression.
Yeah.
And I think like we should do a good job of like documenting that for
Yeah.
ourselves as well.
For sure. Like, it's sick for the audience. It's sick for us as well. No, man, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Been a
thank you.
pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the channel. We're having fire conversations every week on the podcast. Before we end the episode, a quick word from our sponsor, Free Agency. What if I told you there is a good chance you're leaving money on the table in your career? It would kind of annoy you a bit, right? Well, Free Agency aims to stop that. They represent and manage talent in the tech industry. Here's how they do it. First, they provide you with a dedicated talent agent. Think about this as your career quarterback. They understand you and your career goals. Based on that understanding, they bring you suitable interviews at top firms. You focus on smashing the interview, and together with their network, research, negotiation expertise, they will make sure you get a top of market salary. Stop job searching alone and start building your dream career today with Free Agency.